This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
The new LinkedIn Hiring Pro can't undo your last hire. The human postponer. They were the master of one phrase. I'll circle back on that. But 3 months later, you are the one doing all their work and wondering how big that circle is. But LinkedIn Hiring Pro can take the hiring load off your plate by automating the hiring busy work from the initial job post to scheduling interviews. Hire right the first time with LinkedIn Hiring Pro. Post a free job today at linkedin.com/quality.
Welcome back to I Want That Too, the podcast where Disney merch meets Disney history. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and as always, I'm joined by the lovely Lauren Hersey, who, by the way, I spent a good part of this past weekend with.
Yeah, still in recovery mode from Philadelphia.
Yeah. Lauren and I she drove up, I drove down to Philadelphia, and with her husband Eric and let's see, it was Hunter, Miles, and Hunter's girlfriend.
Amanda, yes.
Amanda, there we go. Friend Amanda. We first did the, the Universal Theme Park exhibition at the Franklin Institute, and then we continued on to, the King of Prussia Mall, and did Netflix House, and that was fascinating. But I guess for this show, the big news is that we made it the next day out to the Disney outlet in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we'll talk at length about that later on in today's show.
Yes. And we also are going to be talking about how Disney is rethinking what a Disney store can actually be. So we're going to talk about their new Imagineering lifestyle brand and about some news with their temporary pop-up locations for Disney store. So very Disney store heavy. And then in the feature, you're going to be your 2-part contemporary story is turning into 3 parts, I think you said. But now we're pivoting to like opening day?
Well, we're pivoting to how the hotel got built, which, as I explained, was kind of Jenga in reverse, but we'll get to that later on in today's show. But before we get to that, again, we had a listener, Eddie G. Is that correct? Who posted a review of this podcast?
Yes, Eddie G. Thank you. Just wanted to personally give you a shout out there. And he says that he loves the show, although he finds himself at an age where, like Jim, he's more apt to divest some of the merch than continue to buy it. But he likes our banter and enjoys the Disney's glorious past and all the stories that Jim tells. So thank you, Eddie G, for the awesome review. And we also need to celebrate our sponsor of the podcast.
We do. Which in this case is Be Our Guest Vacation. And if you are planning a Disney vacation, well, it can get complicated in a hurry. That's why our friends at Be Our Guest Vacation, that's where they come in. They're a platinum level earmarked travel agency whose experienced team can help you plan your Disney or Universal vacation, cruise, or next big adventure without all of the stress of handling all those details yourself. So learn more and start planning at beourguestvacations.com. Okay, so now speaking of Disney stores, want to again give a shout out to listener Nicholas M, who clued us into, this is the companion store to what you visited in Pittsburgh earlier this year, right?
Yes. So we've talked at length about how Disney came out with this Disney store limited time concept. They partnered with Go Retail. And so I went to the opening at the one in Pittsburgh. And then at the same time that was announced, it was also announced that there was going to be a second location and Paramus, New Jersey, coming to the Westfield Garden State Plaza. Is that right, Jim?
Yes. A giant mall just off of the Jersey Turnpike, I want to say.
Okay, so what Nicholas M. sent us was he saw that Paramus was now listing the jobs for that, and they're saying it's going to operate from August through early January 2027, and that makes sense because they probably have to get these people in, train them in the Disney way and the systems and that kind of stuff. So I would still say that the location, they have not announced, I don't think the exact opening date, but I believe it'll be early September. And then from what these, job postings are telling us is that it also looked like the Ross Park Mall had a job listing, and it also said till early January. We've had a lot of people asking, like, well, how long are these pop-ups going to stay? And it looked like maybe Ross Park in Pittsburgh got a longer runway to iron out some of the kinks. And maybe what they're doing is saying, okay, well, we're going to get these two up and running through the holiday season, and then perhaps we'll see another batch of these limited pop-up stores announced for, summer, fall next year in more markets. So this might just be to capitalize on the holiday season, like, with those calendar stores that pop up, or like the Toys R Us, concept that's in Macy's. I'm wondering if that's where they're heading with this.
Oh, speaking of where they're heading, I want to correct myself here because I actually, on my epic trip back from our big adventure in Pennsylvania. By the way, it took me 6 hours to drive down on Saturday, and it took 9 hours to get home on Sunday. In fact, I got routed through Paramus thanks to the Magic Box.
Really?
And I want to say I was not on the turnpike; I was on the thruway when I drove by the Paramus Mall. In fact, what's especially interesting, Nancy and I actually have a history of going to the Paramus Mall. And this is years ago, Lauren. We went in 1998 because to support the launch of A Bug's Life, Pixar had a mall tour of sorts, and that was one of the stops. And we trucked on down from New Hampshire to check out the Bug's Life thing in Paramus, and so in a weird sort of way, it's returning to the scene of the crime. And I'm assuming this means another road trip for you, me, and Eric come September.
It sounded that way. I mean, I was talking about the last Disney store that we went to this weekend online, and I then was like, well, I've been to Cincinnati, I've been to Destin, the one in Pittsburgh, the Character Warehouses, the Disney store, the Walt Disney World store, and now this one. And so I feel like I have to I have to fill up my bingo card, right?
Well, there we go.
All of them.
Okay. No. Speaking of our road trip, let's tell the nice folks about, again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we did the Franklin Institute. We saw the Netflix house, which, by the way, I, again, just want to talk about that briefly from a retail point of view, because, I thought this was so smart of the folks who set up the Netflix house at King of Prussia, which I think it was Eric who discovered they had put it in an old Lord & Taylor. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100,000 square foot location. It was me because I was I could not get over that this thing was in a mall. First I was confused that I thought it was going to be in an actual house. It is not. It is in a large retail space, probably an anchor store. But I left there wondering, is Netflix really trying to make a splash in the themed entertainment space.
You and I walked away thinking the same thing because there were so many. We as a group experienced these Stranger Things walkthrough, which was kind of like a Halloween Horror Night maze, but on steroids. I mean, for example, the finale of that thing was the best 3D I've ever seen. Whether a museum setup or a theater or theme park. That was killer. But I want to talk about this just from the retail point of view, because it's, again, interesting idea about how they set up their retail, which, by the way, had a lovely selection, from all sorts of Netflix shows. But Lauren, there's the old cliche that at a theme park you exit through the gift shop, and what I thought was so smart about what the Netflix house people did is that, well, you kind of had no choice. You moved through that retail space multiple times over the day.
No matter what.
Yeah, because, to get access to the bar restaurant, which, by the way, we did both parts of that, or if you were going downstairs to experience whether the Wednesday theme thing or the Stranger Things thing, or the movie theater that was showing Netflix full-length animated films. You constantly had to go through that space. And that was the thing. Every time I went through, I wound up either finding something that I almost bought or something that I did actually buy.
Yeah, and it also kept like the theme of the immersion. I did not know that it was Stranger Things, like 10-year anniversary. And so it wasn't just like, here's a rack of Stranger Things, shirts or pins or hats or like whatever. They all had these big elaborate displays, and they had them weaved in beautifully because right next to Stranger Things, there was a big display for Bridgerton. And so then it's kind of, you're going into like the Bridgerton world. And I thought what was really cute with the Netflix, like Philadelphia installation, because this is the first with another one coming that they actually had. It was like Netflix house merch, but it was like the PHL like influx from Philadelphia. I thought that was pretty clever as well.
It was a really well thought out retail program with stuff that's specific to the venue. There was money spent. It just looked great. And in fact, and what was kind of intriguing about this is the very next day, again, Lauren, Eric, and I and the family, we head on out to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Dutch Country. And by the way, picked up a shoe-fly pie while I was in the area. But why we were there was to check out the Disney store outlet. And you have some thoughts about that.
Oh my gosh. Well, my mind was blown because we're talking about, this is one of the last Disney stores in America. We've talked about it before. There's like 22. And that counts the outlets as well. And like, I'm expecting this to be in a booming metropolis on Route 30 going through. And I was on social media and they said I was saying the name wrong. It's pronounced Lancaster. I say Lancaster, which is a very like Ohio Valley. So I want to get this right for our friends there that are listening. But I was very, very surprised that this Disney outlet was located in what looked like a half-empty like shopping district. And I initially was thinking, because we got there right before opening, that like, there's got to be something wrong here. Like, why would one of the last Disney stores be in this abandoned, like, outlet mall? So I did some digging. So this place was called the Shops at Rockville, and it was at one point a bustling, shopping district. But now, I think it had at one point 120 stores. And then by 2020, it had fell to like 45 stores. And then the last reported was 32. There definitely was not 32 stores when we were there. On one side of the complex, there was like an Oshkosh and a children's place, and then it was like 10 like empty stores.
Well, I wanted to point out again. In fact, I was chatting with Lauren about this while we were in the Disney store. I thought it was somewhat ironic, given that it was in the 2000s, 2010s, that Children's Place actually took over the Disney store chain. So it was kind of bizarre in one sort of faded shopping complex to, we have a Disney store and we have a Children's Place. It's like, wow, back together again.
Yeah, it's so weird. And so like I started going down the rabbit hole of this, like, why is this still here? Because if they've lost the majority of their stores and the Disney store has lost the majority of its physical stores, then how did this one survive? And then after, we had left, it looked like in the 80s and 90s, this was like a booming metropolis. I mean, is it called, it's not Dutchland. What's the theme park? There's a Dutch theme park right next to where this is. In the early 2000s, down the road, not even 5 minutes, Tanger joins the party. And this was the start of the visible demise of Rockville in 2017. They actually defaulted on their mortgage, and then Tanger comes in. And I think that is why this now is half abandoned. So around 2017, this realty group comes in and they buy it for $30 million, and they rebranded the shops at Rockville. And so as I'm doing this digging and research, I put something on social media, and a lot of locals weighed in, and they were actually, they're ripping down a part of this, and they're going to build these Fenmore homes, apartments. And so now you've only got a part of this shopping district that is still active. And then I think they ran into financial issues. So demolition work for that project started in 2024, but it's now delayed. So I just am telling you this for some color context before we get to the actual Disney store, because it is in the middle of nowhere, as far as where one of the last Disney stores should be. So we go in right at opening, and there were people that were kind of lining up outside to rope drop, and we were amongst those folks.
Absolutely. This thing opened up at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. Well, actually, it opened up before 11 o'clock. As Lauren mentioned, there were people waiting, and the Disney store staff was kind enough to open the door, and we hung in there for about 45 minutes, right? Wandering around the store, checking out the merch. And by then, that place was full and busy, right? I mean, it was
packed, yes.
Yeah, a constant line at the registers, people working all of the sales racks looking for bargains. And again, there was an interesting story being told in that story. I mean, for example, one of the things that Laura and I noticed, because again, the thing of a Disney outlet is you get all sorts of stuff from all sorts of arms of the company. And we were looking at at T-shirts and sweaters and plush from Tiana's Bayou Adventure. For example, the otter, no, wait a minute, the possum, the turtle, and the raccoon character that the Imagineers made such a big deal of inventing for Tiana's Bayou Adventure. And these were originally sold in the post-show gift shop for $24, and here they'd been marked down to $9.98. They were there as clearance, folks. Likewise, the sweatshirt that originally went for
T-shirt,
60 T-shirts that originally went for $30. That also were marked down to $9.98. It's one of those things where it's okay. Here's a retail program, at least the initial iteration of a retail program that evidently didn't catch on with the public. What else did you notice, Lauren?
Well, the other thing I noticed that I thought was odd, just coming back from Orlando, was how much Disneyland merch they had versus Disney World being on the East Coast. And like a couple people like commented about that like that is a usual, behavior. That's not something that was an exception. Did you notice that? How much Disneyland stuff there was?
Well, I know enough folks who work. In fact, what's kind of funny is you used to see the very same thing with the Disney outlet that was one town over from the Disneyland Resort in Anaheim. You'd go in there and you'd see an awful lot of Disney World merch. I mean, there was sort of an understanding within the company, just don't have it like in the immediate vicinity of the park. So evidently that's kind of the thinking, West Coast stuff goes east and East Coast stuff goes west.
So weird. But if you're in Orlando and you go to Character Warehouse or any of that, you will get World merch.
This is true.
Yeah. And another thing, Jim, I don't even know if you noticed this, but I'm looking at a picture on my phone of their blind box policy. They had this posted in several places, and it says blind boxes are sold and all sales are final, no discounts apply, no refunds, exchanges, or returns. And because of the visibility of this for blind boxes, it tells me that at one point or another there's a problem.
Well, I mean, what's interesting about folks who collect blind boxes is, in fact, it's kind of funny. I've been doing or making a half-hearted effort to get a full set of the Minions and Monsters blind box that Wendy's is offering. I've got 2 of the 4, but it's a notion of you're constantly looking for what you don't have, and that's the problem. When you lay down your hard-earned money for a blind box and you open it up and you get another one of what you've already got, it's frustrating, and people complain, and the people at the front desk at the Disney outlet store, it's like, look, I'm so sorry, you have a double or a triple of something, but that's not how blind boxes work.
Right.
You roll the dice and you get what you get. So, and when you don't get what you want, there's always eBay.
Right. So. And so the post that I did online caught some real fire because I was really trying to figure out why this was still there. And I came across some Reddit threads of people asking, they live 2.5 hours away. Should they make the trip? And because there were people from everywhere saying, we come down from New York, we come down from here, we come up from DC to go there. So I'm going to ask you that question, Jim. If somebody asked you, was this worth driving 2.5 hours to visit in between your, park visits? Would you recommend it?
What I'm going to say here is going to be, a bit of misdirection. But yeah, I'm actually already planning a trip back to, Pennsylvania for a couple of reasons. One is the Franklin Institute next year is doing that Lucas exhibit. So, Eric and I were already talking about, we got to get Dan Graney down here and, we can do a show. On the other hand, though, I really want to make a return to the Netflix house because they were doing such exciting things with themed entertainment and had such a good time with the Stranger Things walkthrough experience. I want to go across the hall now and check out the Wednesday one. But I'm also not going to lie that when they show the Netflix animated films in that custom-made professional theater downstairs, and I want to be able to see the new Brad Bird movie, Ray Gun, on a big screen, and that's the thing. When I watch my movies on Netflix, I'm doing it on my laptop, and which means that there's inevitably a cat walking across the keys and disturbing my movie. So if I make a trip down to Pennsylvania, it'll mostly be to probably go to the Netflix house. But yeah, I'll maybe work in a side trip over to the Disney outlet.
No, Jim, you need to come to Dutch Wonderland with us. We honest, that's the theme park that I was telling you about. And it looks like it's kind of a castle park as when we were driving by. The tickets for that, it was open on Sunday, which a lot of the Amish things are not. But this was open, and the park tickets were only like $39 a piece. And they had fairly low. I would like to stay there at Dutch Wonderland. It looked so cool.
It was 50 years ago this year that my high school band did an exchange with a town from Pennsylvania, Dutch country. So we went out there, and as part of that trip, we ate at the Good and Plenty, and it was this amazing meal that ended with a piece of shoofly pie. And I've been chasing shoofly pie for 50 years now, and it was just this past weekend at the Dutch Haven store, which is just up the street from the Disney outlet. They literally had a sign on the street that said shoofly pie, and I hit the brakes and pulled in and got one, Lauren. And then, in fact, that's how I thanked my brother and sister-in-law for bringing Nancy back to the house at midnight last night from her trip to Georgia. I gave them 2 slices of shoofly pie, for their troubles. But yes, for you, sure, let's go to Dutch Kingdom and check out that thing. But I do want to just circle back to the Disney outlet for a sec. And look, there were some amazing things there in the store. Like, for example, we found tucked away in a corner a set of the Roosevelt shirts, which, by the way, when you actually get to handle those things in person, it's like, oh my God, they're made out of such great material.
That's what Eric said. He is teetering with buying one because they're so soft, but he's concerned that he's going to have to wear another shirt because the material is so soft and wonderful that he'll feel exposed.
Yeah. But that was, I thought, was kind of intriguing to go through an entire Disney store, and the front half of the store was loaded with merchandise for Toy Story 5 and Disney princesses and Marvel, and it just felt weird after 45 minutes to walk out of the store and I'm good. There was nothing there I felt compelled to buy. And Lauren, it was one of these things where it's I'm like, well, why is it? Was it that, there wasn't enough stuff necessarily marked down? I mean, I felt like if I really wanted any of this stuff, I could hop on, DisneyStore.com or Amazon and buy it. It didn't seem like I'm at an outlet. I should see more outlet-y prices.
For a lot of it, just to give you some context, Orlando was probably about 30% more than what you would get at a Character Warehouse or something. As far as the deal, if you're still going to spend $60 on a sweatshirt and stuff like that. But if this is your, just your little touch of magic, and I didn't think it was highly themed either, an old school Disney store. So the prices were not any. I didn't really find anything either, but it's also outlet, so you don't know. It's changing all the time. But
no. Every time you come in, there will be something new. So like I said, if I'm back there in December to go check out Ray Gunn at the Netflix house, while I'm there to check out the Wednesday walkthrough, hopefully there'll be something. And who knows? Maybe even by then, there will be a few Yen Sid items there. And speaking of which, let's talk about the other news that broke this past week.
Yeah, so I was in the car on the way home from Philadelphia, and I was talking to Eric about, doing the show and stuff, and he was like, did you look at that thing I sent you about the Imagineering line coming to D23? And I'm thinking he's just talking about Mickey's of Glendale, and I'm like, we've already talked about Mickey's of Glendale and all of the merch coming to D23, which I do have to say, they dropped the park or the floor map so you can see where all the displays are going to be. And it does look like merch is playing a more prominent role than Expo's past. But anyways, and he was like, no, this is something totally different. So Imagineering is moving beyond attractions and, the traditional souvenir merch with this new lifestyle brand. Like Jim said, it's called Yen Sid. And they are the Mickey's of Glendale, which is the shop within Imagineering. They've had their own line, and they described it as like for Imagineers, by Imagineers, but that has largely been concealed from general public. And so maybe Disney was seeing that, there's such a demand for those Mickey's of Glendale items and then the pop-ups and that kind of stuff. And I'm looking at all of the collabs they're doing. Like you mentioned Roosevelt's, you mentioned, we've talked about Cakeworthy before. Roosevelt's is kind of known for their like button-up shirts, where Cakeworthy is kind of known for their flannels, but they both sell other apparel too. And like those lifestyle brands have gotten so big that now they're selling them at the theme parks, on the Disney store. So I think that they're probably trying to leverage the name and the brand of Imagineering to essentially charge more for their merch. Because I'm like, okay, well, why? Like, why is Imagineering coming out with like a lifestyle clothing brand? And then I took a deep dive into the org of the company, and there was nothing as a part of a restructure. Like, this is still technically under Bruce Bond's, org, since he's running the creative efforts. So what do you think, Jim, about Imagineering entering the chat with a lifestyle brand?
Well, okay. I'm of a couple of different minds in regard to this. That look, Imagineering, it is cool in and of itself, and the notion that they're now launching a deliberately cool lifestyle brand, it's like, it's one of those things like, okay, maybe you're trying a little too hard here. I mean, I will say this much. The conceit of Yen Sid is that this is for people who want Disney clothing that doesn't look like the usual theme park stuff. So again, it's not large character graphics, and you've assembled some material here for the reference. They talk about how it uses modern silhouettes, tonal artwork, and unusual materials and references that will only be recognized by knowledgeable fans. And then can you talk about the the photochromatic ink aspect of this?
Yeah, that basically is where the design changes in the sunlight. Like, I'm sure you've seen that those brands before, and there's going to be like hidden details. And again, what I think this boils down to is using that brand that is associated with quality to be able to put out a more quality apparel line under their own banner and charge more for that as well. But it is for those seasoned fans, I would say. So like we talked about the Monster University hat before. Like if you're wearing that out into the everyday world, it's kind of like having a Jeep. like it's like a nod to, oh, hey, you're like a Disney fan or Disney person too.
Yeah, I mean, the images that they put out there for the initial Yen Sid brand, which, by the way, is making its debut at
D23.
The D23 Expo, August 14th through the 16th, and a perfect place for this to debut. But that, to me, I guess the question is, and then what?
Right.
Is this material then going to be available on the DisneyStore.com? I mean, where exactly are people going to be able to continue to shop for Yen Sid?
Yeah. It's going to be like the treatment that they have with a Cakeworthy or Roosevelt's, it looks like. It's going to be on the Disney store. It's going to be in the theme parks. It's going to be on the cruise lines, in the resorts. And so they're coming out with these two initial collections, and one of which is Haunted Mansion. So I think that they're putting a lot of eggs in this initial test basket. It's going to be treated like Mickey's of Glendale, and it's actually going to have its own shopping experience, its own virtual queue. So I think they'll be able to tell a lot through kind of examining the data after the fact to see what the interest
You're not wrong.
is. But I think a Mickey's of Glendale fan is going there. Like, I went there saying, I want something that says Disney Imagineering on it. Because if I wear that, it's kind of like taking that Instagram picture, I guess. If I wear that into the theme park, it's not something that everybody is going to have access to. And now this is the opposite. It's going to be readily available for anybody that wants it.
Well, but at the same time, it's also, as they mentioned, it's characters that members of the general public won't know. It's deliberately understated. I mean, it is very much the opposite of Mickey's of Glendale. It's like, it's literally the clothing equivalent of a secret handshake.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like, hey, look at me. I'm I'm a fan of Imagineering, but I'm saying so in a very subtle way that most people aren't going to get.
Yeah. So we're gonna see. And I mean, my thought was, did they over collaborate, right? Because they want to be in front of these desirable audiences. And that's where you're seeing like the Stony Clover, the Vera Bradley, Dooney and Burke, that kind of stuff. And now it's like, okay, well, we have what we need from some of those relationships. Can we put any of this under our own banner and leverage that, which has, been a different approach than we've seen from Disney as of late. Like, you've seen a lot more collaborations where they're not taking on 100% of the risk, but this did not look like it added, like I said, like a new department to their org chart. So I guess we will see, and we'll keep you posted as far as this line goes. But it ties back to the overall D23 floor plan and how merch is becoming a way bigger part of the fan experience.
No. You're not wrong. Though, speaking of collaborations, when we get back from this break, we're going to talk about one of the perhaps one of the less successful collaborations the Walt Disney Company entered into, and that was when it partnered with U.S. Steel to build themed resorts at Walt Disney World. But before we get to that story, there's this.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Listening to this podcast instead of doom scrolling? Smart move. Another smart move? Getting help from one of State Farm's 19,000 local agents when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
I wrote a little song to remind you, Choice Hotels get you more of the experiences you value. The Cambria Hotel's got it all. A rooftop bar, have a ball. Cocktails up here feel just right. Is Cambria amazing? All right. Bring a date, your team, or even your mom. Book direct at choicehotels.com. See you on the roof.
This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino Ciao. A gift from Italy to your home. San Pellegrino Ciao is a flavored sparkling water made with real fruit juice, finished with a pinch of Sicilian salt for a perfectly balanced taste. So which flavor will you choose? Peach, lime, blood orange, cherry, or maybe the all-new limoncello? Crafted in Italy with 0 grams of added sugar. San Pellegrino Ciao. Buy it now.
And we're back. Okay, Lauren, on our last episode of I Want That Too, we began talking about Disney's Contemporary Resort, and we brought that up because you and the family, during your most recent Orlando excursion, stayed in, did you stay in the main building or the Bay Lake Towers?
Bay Lake Tower.
Got it. Okay. And just want to remind folks that this is the hotel complex that's built on that piece of land land that's between Bay Lake and Seven Seas Lagoon. And early on in the development of the Walt Disney World Resort, and we're talking 1966 or thereabouts, some 5 years before these 27,000-acre man-made destination resort rose up out of the Central Florida swamps. And at that time, Lauren, this building, the A-frame, the 14-story tall thing, was given the name the Contemporary Resort because, well, okay, all of the other resorts that were going to be built around the Magic Kingdom at that time, and we're talking Polynesian Village Resort, plus the announced but ultimately never built Thai Asian Resort. That was the one that was where the Grand Flow was eventually built, plus the Venetian and the Persian Resort. All of those buildings, and you can look at the early models and the concept art, they're very exotic looking, whereas the A-frame that was the Contemporary, it had been designed to sit, as we talked on last week's show, at the very edge of the Magic Kingdom in such a way that it would be viewable from inside of Tomorrowland. So it was supposed to look futuristic. But here's the thing. Just as a placeholder in the mid-1960s, when the specific hotel was in the works for the Walt Disney World Resort, it was just called the Contemporary. But as Project Florida begins moving from its planning phase to actual construction, the folks at Disney who are in charge of marketing this still in the process of being built destination resort, they have to convince the, members of the general public to eventually buy plane tickets, fly to Orlando, get a vacation package, come to Walt Disney World. And, they're going to be among the first to experience the vacation resort. Well, it was these folks who went through Disney World management, and this is now 68 or thereabouts, and effectively said, the Contemporary Resort is a terrible name for a hotel and a destination resort. I mean, it's bland. It's generic. It's like calling your fast food restaurant place where you can buy hamburgers. It's just sort of it was too on the nose for a hotel that it was supposed to have a futuristic theme. So the marketing team at Disney is like, can we please come up with a more colorful, exotic name for this hotel? Something that makes it sound like a place when you're on vacation where you might actually have a good time. And so what's interesting about this, Lauren, is right after they make this ask, you'll be going through early promotional material for Walt Disney World, and you come across about, hey, you want to stay in the Tempo Bay Resort. And it's like, Tempo Bay? And it's like, all right, so let's explain the name. Obvious part, the A-frame is being built right at the water's edge between Bay Lake and Seven Seas Lagoon. And since people who stayed at the hotel were going to be able to swim in Bay Lake, not to mention renting water sprites, their water skiing lessons, they could rent catamarans, they could go bass fishing. So the marketing department was like, look, we want to be able to mention as part of this hotel name something that plays up that it's right on the water. So that explains the bay part of Tempo Bay. But as for tempo, which, all of those former high school band people will tell you, well, that's a musical term. The thing of Disney marketing department is like, all right, if we take the tempo part out of this hotel's earliest name, the Contemporary Resort, that gives us some sort of continuity with what this hotel was originally called, plus tempo. If you're discussing music, well, that has to do with the speed at which a piece is being performed, the beat. And the thinking was, well, this is the hotel that the monorail is going to be going through, day and night. And so it's going to be very dynamic. People are going to walk in and feel the energy of this building and see the monorails constantly coming and going. And, so this would be the one hotel on Disney property where they could really feel the tempo of the Disney World Resort. Okay, so that's our new name, Tempo Bay Resort. Only one problem, Lauren. Walt's brother, Roy O. Disney, thinks that Tempo Bay is an absolutely terrible name for a resort. So he tells the marketing team, change it back. And what was interesting about Roy is he had some very distinct thoughts when it came to names and Project Florida. I mean, remember, when this destination resort was first announced back in November of 1965, it was just called Disney World, much in the same way that the company's family theme park out in Anaheim is just called Disneyland. Anyway, when Walt dies in December of 66, it's Roy who insists that the original name for Project Florida be amended, changed from just plain Disney World to Walt Disney World, that he wanted to make sure that his little brother still got full credit for what the Disney company was doing down in Florida. Likewise, Lauren, Roy put his foot down when it came to Liberty Square's marquee attraction in Florida. You have to remember, early on, that show was called One Nation Under God. And Roy really did not like that name. Walt's brother was concerned that if a Disney theme park had an attraction with the word God in the title, that might somehow offend a certain portion of the ticket-buying public. So, Roy told the Imagineers, give me a God-free name, right? So this is how One Nation Under God eventually gets renamed and wound up with the far more generic-sounding Hall of Presidents. Back to the contemporary now. Walt tried to lay down the law in regards to what that hotel should be named, because Royal was a simple man with simple tastes. In fact, this is why when the Imagineers proposed building resort next to the Magnolia and the Palm, those were the first two golf courses built on Disney property. Joe Lee actually designed them. In fact, interesting little note, Lauren, the golf courses were completed months ahead of time. In fact, we're talking April of 1971, some 6 months ahead of when Walt Disney World, the resort, opened to the public. And I'm not going to lie, Lauren, there were a lot of Disney executives who took advantage of the fact that the golf courses are finished. I had a terrible day at work today. I'm going to go play golf. But anyway, the resort's only been open a couple of months. But the Magnolia and Palm are so popular with Disney World guests, the Imagineers, one of the very first things they want to do is build a full-size hotel right next to the golf course's clubhouse. And they come at Roy with this pile of fancy-sounding, kind of clever names, sort of like how today that complex is called Shades of Green, which is supposed to riff off of the fact that, well, golf courses have greens. And more to the point, given that the Department of Defense back in February of 1994, they signed a 100-year lease for this Disney property. It made it one of 5 armed forces recreation centers in the country, which means that this Walt Disney World Resort is only available to active duty service members, veterans and their families. And since so many people who are in the armed services typically wear uniforms that are green, again, that's why it's called Shades of Green, which, Lauren, is a name that's just too clever by half. But anyway, when the Imagineers, go to Roy with their, go to him for their approval of this project, Walt's brother is like, all right, so it's a hotel that's being built on a golf course, right? So why don't we just call it the golf resort? And it's like, okay, you're signing the checks. And that's what happened when this 151-room hotel opens December of 73. That's what it's called. But speaking of construction, when we get back from this break, we will talk about the unusual way that the Contemporary Resort was put together. But before that, there's this.
¿Escuchan eso? Es el delicioso encuentro entre un Extra Crispy McCrispy Strip y la cremosa salsa César. Si así suena, solo imagínate cómo sabe. Salsa César, en McDonald's por tiempo limitado. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Amazon Health AI presents Painful Thoughts.
Why did I search the internet for answers to my cold sore problem? Now I'm stuck down a rabbit hole filled with images of alarmingly graphic sores in various stages of ooze. I can clear my search history, but I can never unsee that.
Don't go down the rabbit hole. Amazon Health AI gets you the right care, fast. Healthcare just got less painful.
And we're back. Okay, Lauren, so again, earlier on in today's show, you were mentioning that you and the family stayed in the Bay Lake Towers, which I want to say is 15 stories tall. What floor were you guys on?
We were on 4. So we went up to floor 5 to use the Skyway to walk to the main building.
Oh, okay. And you still got a decent view from there? I remember you were talking about looking out across the water at the new DVC that's being built over at Fort Wilderness, right?
Yeah, the Lakeshore Lodge. We did. And the view was the backside of the Contemporary, the main building.
There we go. Well, now, speaking of the Contemporary, again, 14-story A-frame, and you've probably already heard the story about the prefabricated rooms that are created for the Contemporary and then craned into place, slid into their designated slots in the structure, and then workmen come along and wire those individual rooms into the building's electrical grid, hook it up to the plumbing system. By the way, the exact same technique was used over at the Polynesian Village Resort. And these rooms were assembled right there on Disney property, and in fact, in an industrial park, which, by the way, is still in place. It's located just to the north of where Saratoga Springs operates even today. And, Lauren, this factory, on a good day, could crank out 10 finished rooms. And each of these 9,000-pound rooms would then be placed in a flatbed and trucked over to the appropriate work site. Now, we're talking the Contemporary, the Polynesian Village.
What a weird way to build a building.
Well, but this is a part of the Disney World construction process that doesn't get talked about, because this is how U.S. Steel became involved in this project. You see, they had just launched a division at U.S. Steel that did these, that prefabricated rooms. And the notion was that, potentially, we can make prefabricated, if you're building an office tower, we can create, offices, or for, it's an apartment building or homes, and that was the thing of why they got involved with Walt Disney World, the construction. They wanted to showcase for this brand new process. But at the same time, it was challenging because, again, as I mentioned earlier in today's show, it was kind of Jenga in reverse, in that whenever a hotel room got slid into place, the crane lifted it up, and if we're talking about the Contemporary, the particular place on that 14-story A-frame, got slid into place. Whenever they did that, they then had to, almost immediately, on the opposite side of the structure, put another room in that effectively mirrored the one had gone in, with the idea that they were constantly balancing the load that was being placed on the steel infrastructure of the building. Well, as it turned out, again, U.S. Steel wanted Disney World to be a showcase for this new process. But again, it was new. And, there were kinks, there were discoveries they made along the way. And what they learned, for example, is that I mentioned earlier, they could produce 10 completed prefabricated rooms a day. But here's the thing. They had told Disney going into it, oh, yeah, no problem. We can deliver 15 rooms a day. So the project, almost from the start, begins falling behind schedule, which, by the way, Lauren, this becomes an enormous concern in the fall of 1970. We are now, by the way, just 1 year out from the previously announced opening date of the Walt Disney World Resort. And Disney World senior management does a site visit, and they can't help but notice they're walking by the Contemporary and the Poly, and there are not a lot of rooms in place. And so immediately after this, Roy calls for a confab with the gentleman who's in charge of U.S. Steel's efforts down at Walt Disney World, and Roy just flat out asked the guy, it's like, look, are the Contemporary and Polynesian resorts actually going to be ready for for October? Are they going to be ready for October? And to which the U.S. Steel reporter replies, well, look, if we're talking October of 1972, absolutely. If we're talking October of 71, not so much. And Lauren, this is the Disney company's first ever destination resort. But you can't have a destination resort if there's no place for people to stay.
There's no resort.
No, and that was the thing. So Roy, after this meeting with the U.S. Steel rep, calls his own people at Disney and says, what do we do here? And the general consensus was that, well, look, U.S. Steel is unmotivated by our October 71 opening deadline for the theme park. They see Project Florida as a showcase for their prefabricated room business and nothing more. And what Roy gets told is like, look, I think we have to buy out U.S. Steel, which, by the way, to further complicate this, Lauren, U.S. Steel, after they finished the construction of the Contemporary and the Poly, they were supposed to run both of those resorts. Their people were going to man the front desk. Their people were going to handle baggage services. Because again, the whole notion was that these two hotels were going to be showcases for their new prefabricated room business, so that they had to be like these models of efficiency when these hotels finally did open in 1972. But anyway, this is late 1970, and basically what Disney upper management tells Roy is like, look, if we buy out U.S. Steel and then put our own people in place, it's likely we can get the Contemporary and the Poly up and running by October of 1971. But if we're going to do this, we need to move now. So Roy gets on the phone, calls U.S. Steel upper management, says, look, we're unhappy. Orlando's so far behind schedule. You guys promised a lot of things you're not delivering on. These hotels are not going to be ready for opening day. So we're now looking to break our deal. What's it going to take to buy you guys out? And U.S. Steel, which again got this brand new division, and the Disney World project is supposed to showcase it, to show the world what they can do with prefabricated homes. They don't want to break this deal, so they turn to Roy and give him what they think is an impossibly high buyout point, which is $100 million. And Roy, to his credit, I mean, this is the guy, Lauren, who, since 1965, and in just 5 years' time, has seen the price of building Walt Disney World go from $100 million to $200 million to now $300 million. He doesn't even blink. He just, finishes the phone call, reaches out to the bank that Disney has been doing business with for Project Florida, and arranges for a line of credit of another $100 million to buy out U.S. Steel. And then at that point, Disney's own people, they fly down to Florida overnight. They get their own, people in the field, and they have just one goal in mind. The Contemporary and the Poly have to be ready in some form by October of 1971. And Lauren, that means 7 days a week, 24-hour-a-day operation. Which comes at a cost. And no, I'm not just talking about how we lost Roy Disney in December of 71 at the age of 78. He was felled by a stroke. In fact, Laura and I were talking about this before we recorded the show today, that the saddest part of the story is just prior to Walt's passing in December of 66, Roy had let his little brother know that he was getting ready to retire from Disney. In fact, Roy and his wife, Edna, were in the process of planning an around-the-world cruise that would have gotten underway in 1967. But that never happened because Walt's older brother now had to pick up the burden of completing Project Florida, and that was 5 years of financial stress, not to mention constant meetings, and the poor guy is in his 70s at this point. Somebody with a full career like him typically is already retired at 65. Anyway, back now to the Contemporary Hotel to make that October 71 deadline. Lauren, there's no polite way to say this. Corners were cut. In fact, this is why less than 2 years after this place first opens, Disney then begins having to renovate rooms at the hotel that are falling apart. Every week, starting in the summer of 1973, 8 rooms at a time were pulled out of the Contemporary's inventory so that the shoddy, rushed work could be revisited. Electrical could be upgraded. Plumbing could be repaired. And speaking of plumbers, how many of you remember the infamous Watergate plumbers, those off-the-book employees of the Committee to Re-elect the President? By the way, I love that the acronym for that outfit is CREEP. These are the guys who got caught in June of 1972 when they broke into the Democratic Party's national headquarters, which were located in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. It was this event, Lauren, that led to a cascade of things that eventually led to Richard Nixon resigning from the presidency in August of 1974. But between those two dates, there was Nixon's famous "I am not a crook" speech, which, you're going to love this, Lauren, Nixon actually delivers at the Contemporary Resort, November of 1973. Right there, he is speaking at the Associated Press's National Convention. He's in a room there in the hotel in front of 400 editors. And by the way, I have to wonder how many of those guys had to stay someplace other than the Contemporary because, again, they're week in, week out, they're pulling 8 rooms out, to re-upgrade and repair them. But anyway, on that note, folks, on the next installment of this series, we're going to take a closer look at the hotel itself. How, for example, the top of the World Supper Club on the roof of this 14-story tall A-frame became the California Grill. Likewise, how the North Garden wing of the Contemporary was torn down in 2007 to make room for where the Herseys recently stayed, the Bay Lake Tower. Or another seldom told story here, folks, how some 10 years earlier, Walt Disney World's Tennis and Racket Club, which, by the way, was located in the parking lot at the Contemporary in the corner closest to the Magic Kingdom, was supposed to be torn down to make room for the Magic Kingdom Suites, which was to have been a Disney World hotel that would have made it seem like you were staying overnight in Toontown. But we'll talk more about those projects next week. But for now, Lauren, I think it's time that we wrapped up this week's edition of I Want That Too.
Yep. I mean, it sounds like we got to close up this shop for today.
By the way, folks, if you want to keep up on everything happening across the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, please follow us on social.
Yep, and if you've got a question or an idea for a future episode, shoot us a message. Jim's at jim@jimhillmedia.com. I'm at lauren@laurenhersey.com. And if you're not quite ready for all these Disney conversations to end, be sure you're checking out Jim Hill Media on Patreon for ad-free shows, bonus content, and even more Disney history. But that does it for today's episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on I Want That Too.